Hi there, I'm Renos Vakis, lead economist at the World Bank, and your host for Accelerating Development Ideas for Impact. This is not your typical podcast. It's an AI powered conversation brought to you by the World Bank Institute for Economic Development, where we unpack the latest research with one goal in mind, turning big ideas into real world impact. Let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Reynos. Imagine you're a policymaker trying to grow your country's economy. You want more jobs, more investment, maybe even a new industry to take off. But where do you start? Stay out of the way or step in to help certain industries grow? That's the challenge explored in this report, Industrial Policy for Development Approaches in the 21st Century. And it turns out the toolkit for governments today looks very different from what it did a generation ago.
It certainly does. For a long time, industrial policy was treated as something of a taboo, but the landscape has shifted completely. In a recent survey of development economists dealing with countries around the globe, 80% reported that governments sought their advice on this exact topic in just the last year.
80%? That's a huge comeback. I guess the question is why now? What's driving that demand?
It is back to basics, jobs and investments. You see, for while advanced economies often pursue industrial policy with national security or climate change goals, developing country governments are overwhelmingly motivated by classic economic development. They want to create employment and attract capital.
Right, so it's not just about, say, building microchips for security, it's broader.
Precisely. The report defines it as any government action expected to increase a strategic business activity. That is not limited to manufacturing factories. It includes agriculture, services, and other sectors. And while the famous 1993 East Asian Miracle Report was skeptical about whether that growth experience could be replicated, new evidence suggests that it is more possible now. Global education levels are higher, political environments have improved, and economies are more open.
Okay, so the environment is ready, but here's the part that really surprised me when I looked at the data. I think most people assume the big headlines, the US or Europe subsidizing green tech, mean that rich countries are the ones doing all the heavy lifting. But the data shows something different.
It does indeed. The reality is that industrial policy is heavily practiced in developing economies. When you review national development plans, low income countries actually target an average of 13 specific industries. High income countries, they target just 5.
13 versus 5? So developing nations are trying to do more with less.
Exactly. And looking at upper middle income countries, total business subsidies, that's direct funding plus tax breaks, have reached an all time high among all country income groups, averaging 4.2% of GDP. But here's the friction point: low income countries often lack the cash for subsidies or the capacity to manage them. So they turn to a different tool: import tariffs.
Tariffs, that feels like a blunt instrument.
It is. Low income countries use import tariffs most intensely. Their rates average 12% compared to just 5% in high income nations. They do it because they lack the fiscal space for subsidies. Yet, the dispersion of tariff rates across products is much larger in developing economies than in advanced ones. This high variation suggests that tariffs are not just for revenue. They apply selectively to protect specific industries. But that brings us to the core of the report's first big takeaway: matching the tool to the country's constraint.
Yeah, this is where the report uses that car analogy, right? I found this really helpful.
It is a vivid image, yes. The report distinguishes between first choice tools that fix market failures directly and second choice tools that regulates indirectly. Using a second choice tool like a tariff is like fixing a car that pulls to the right by inflating the tires unevenly instead of fixing the alignment. It might keep the car straight for a moment, but it causes wear and tear everywhere else.
That makes total sense. So, if you're a policymaker, how do you know if you can afford to fix the alignment or if you're stuck messing with the tires?
You have to look at 3 factors: government bandwidth, local market size, and fiscal space. If you have a small market and limited funds, you cannot just copy a rich country's strategy. For these countries, the report suggests industrial parks as often one of the most feasible first choice. They solve coordination failures like power and logistics and don't require massive fiscal outlays.
And what about the countries with more resources?
Large economies with high capacity can use complex tools like innovation subsidies that provide businesses with grants to do things like use technologies or make products that they haven't made before. But, and this is key, they require significant administrative capacity to manage.
Right, you need a bureaucracy that can actually track that money.
Exactly. The risk of mismatch is real. Many developing economies rely on tariffs because they are easy to implement. But in a small market, this often backfires. Look at Argentina's electronics sector in the 2000s. The tariffs protected the industry, but it led to high costs and low quality because the domestic market wasn't big enough to drive competition.
So, copying the US steel strategy from the 19th century doesn't work if you don't have a large market like the US in the 19th century. They also had all the resources like iron ore locally and didn't need to import them. That connects the dots for me.
Correct. And that leads to the second major takeaway, the portfolio approach. There's this old idea of scientific targeting that a government can sit down and pick the perfect winner. The report says stop trying to do that. Instead, accept that some projects will fail and manage a portfolio of risks.
A portfolio, like an investor. So you hedge your bets.
In a way, governments can balance strategy across three risk levels based on their comparative advantage. Low risk is supporting what you are already good at. Medium risk is targeting activities that are adjacent, like Costa Rica moving from bananas to pineapples. They used similar agricultural tech, so it was a safe leap.
And high risk?
High risk is targeting something really far from your current capabilities, but sometimes it pays off. Take the case of Tamil Nadu in India and the iPhone.
Oh, I saw this. They're assembling the iPhone 16 there now, right?
They are, and it was a mix of top down and bottom up strategy. The national government offered production linked incentives, that's their high risk top down part. But the state government, Tamil Nadu, solved a specific coordination failure. They built a large scale housing project for 18,000 workers. Private developers wouldn't fund it, so the state stepped in.
18,000 people. See, that's the part I love. It's not just a tax break, it's literally building homes so people can actually take the jobs.
Exactly. It was a tangible solution to a tangible problem. But we must be honest about the other side of the coin. If you take risks, you will have failures. The report emphasizes that governments must have the capacity to let losers go.
That sounds hard politically. Nobody wants to admit a program failed.
It is difficult, but necessary. The report recommends sunset clauses. Support should have automatic termination dates, but longer than you think. It can take typically 10 years for new activities to get off the ground. After then, you only extend it if there is hard evidence of productivity gain.
So, no zombie projects living forever on government money. But to do that, you need good people running the show.
You need institutions. Historically, we looked at the technocratic ideal, like Japan's famous MITI. Today, that role is played by independent agencies like investment promotion agencies or national development banks. The report outlines three critical criteria for them to work.
Lay them on me.
First, embeddedness. The agency must be in continuous dialogue with the private sector. They need to know the difference between my problems and your problems. Second, carrots and sticks. Support must be conditional. In the Republic of Korea, access to credit was tied directly to export performance. If you didn't export, you didn't get the loan.
That's tough love.
It is effective love. And third, accountability. Agencies must report results publicly. Look at Singapore's government linked companies. They emphasize profitability and eventually sell stakes to the private sector. They don't hold on forever.
It sounds like a lot of discipline is required. It's not just spending money, it's spending money with rules, limits, and a willingness to stop.
That is the perfect summary. The verdict from this report is what I would call conditional optimism. Industrial policy is not a magic bullet. It cannot replace economy wide fundamentals. If you use it as a temporary fix for poor infrastructure or bad education, it will fail. You must commit to improving those fundamentals simultaneously.
That's a really grounded place to land. It's a tool, not a miracle. So, if we're wrapping this up for policymakers listening, what's the one big thing they should take back to the office on Monday?
The final advice is this: whenever possible, prioritize public inputs over market interventions. Building that industrial park or training that workforce creates fewer economic distortions and costs less than trying to manipulate prices with tariffs. It is about building the foundation for growth rather than trying to force it.
That's clear, practical, and honestly pretty hopeful. It feels like there's a roadmap here that didn't exist 20 years ago.
There is. We are moving past the ideological debates of state versus market and entering an era of pragmatism. It is about using the right tools, understanding your constraints, and having the courage to experiment and correct course along the way. Over to you, Renos.
Thank you for joining us. You can find the full report on our website. Just follow the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. And before you go, how do you plan to put what you learn into practice? And what topics you'd like us to explore next? We'd love to know. Until then, goodbye.